really needs to just stop. You're trying far too hard. CNN does a poll, and the poll results come out. They are this. Joe Biden at 28%. Oh, wow, Biden is not even in the race, and Biden is taking the lead over Sanders. Oh, all of those people who were saying Sanders was unassailable, Sanders was going to be the nominee, Sanders is the best shot and front runner. Look at this. Kneel before the centrist Joe Biden. How do your hopes feel in this situation? The person who you believed was going to carry the day, the person you believe had the best shot, and that the public was on his side, the most popular, is getting beaten by Joe centrist, touchy-feely, slightly creepy Biden. There's a problem, however, with this poll. I mean, as you go down the list, Harris 12%, O'Rourke 11%, Warren 6%, Booker, etc., etc. Take a look at the polling itself and what's derived from that. Meaning, from those results, CNN comes out, Bernie Sanders' net favorability among Americans moved from 16% to 3%, all right? Excuse me. A majority of potential Democratic voters, 56%, said they have a better chance of winning the presidency as somebody other than Sanders. I love that tidbit. When you look at this right here, Sanders, though, may have to convince Democratic voters that he's electable. In our poll, just 30% of the Democratic voters believe the party had a better chance of winning the presidency with him than someone else as the nominee. The vast majority, 59%, think they have a better shot of winning with somebody else. All right. Now, when I read this, I have to think to myself, wow, I need to see this poll. I mean, is it possible that Sanders' popularity has fallen to such a degree? I mean, CNN is telling me this, so it has to be right. But there's nothing else here. I mean, there's a bunch of advertisements. I had to look further into this and look elsewhere in order to get more information on this. And I was able to get more information on this. So, right here. The methodology of the poll, right? I mean, if we're going to see a poll like this, don't we have to know who that poll is being taken from? The study was conducted for CNN via telephone by SSRS, an independent research company. Interviews were conducted from March 14th to March 17th, 2019 among a sample of 1,003 respondents. The landline total respondents were 348, and there were 655 cell phone respondents. The marginless sample error for the total respondents is 3.8, and a 95% confidence level. The design effect was 1.48. More information about SSR can be obtained by visiting, etc. Unless otherwise noted, the result beginning with March 31st through April 12th, 2006 survey. Okay, that part is not necessary. 348 respondents were landline, 655 were cell phones. The 348 being landline is somewhat problematic, right? The majority of the people who we're talking about today use cell phones. If we're talking about the majority of the people from the standpoint of the young, if we're talking about the majority of people from the standpoint of people who are middle class to poor, they use cell phones. It tends to trend towards the high end of the income scale for landlines, not to mention tends to be older. This first point, meaning a third of the respondents are of a completely demographic, almost in a solid way, like solidly in a very specific demographic section. Older, wealthier, and let's be honest, they tend to lean towards more conservative candidates. Millennials, however, don't have landlines, and millennials will be the largest voting bloc in this election. Using landlines in this day and age is somewhat of a pointless endeavor. And I would put to you that the use of landlines, when the majority of the people, especially of other demographics, are going to be in this voting contest, it's somewhat of a problematic methodology. Here's another point. the majority of the people who were being polled were, if you can notice, over the age of 50. The people who they got the biggest tally from were 50 to 64, 65 and older, 45 plus. I hope that makes sense. Like, the respondents in this particular poll trended towards being older. Again, millennials would be the largest voting demographic, and older people tend to trend towards not Sanders. I'm just saying, polls like this, it's the search for meaning. CNN comes out and make the argument that Bernie Sanders is losing esteem, his popularity is falling, and all this other stuff. The sky's falling. The Sanders campaign is falling apart. And then you look at the poll and you find that the particular demographic that disliked Sanders was the one that was oversampled. And even in that model, you still got Bernie Sanders is number 2. There's something to be said about that. There's a lot of stuff that's being thrown out right now with regards to other people who are trying to gain a certain degree of momentum in the race. These things will happen over the course of the next several years. Can't necessarily overly respond to when these things come out. The point that I kind of want to make to people who are Sanders supporters is just basically this. The polling and everything else, it is hard to get it in. Don't overthink the stuff that comes up. That's my only point. Sanders had more millennials than Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump combined. He pulls them in spades. Millennials will be the largest voting demographic. Millennials can be somewhat sketchy in regards to getting to the polls, but under somebody who galvanizes them, they will be there in spades. This dealt with registered voters. This didn't deal with people who Sanders is also trying to bring into the political process. This is dealing with people who are already in the process. Even in polls like this, regardless of the methodology of those polls, Bernie Sanders comes out typically 1 or 2. There's something to be said about that. Even in the fundraising numbers, his support out blew the doors off of anybody else in the race. The next closest competitor was Beto, and he had, I think like less than half of Sanders' donation, roughly less than half of Sanders' donations. My point is, they're going to throw out all sorts of flack. Part of this is trying to get this notion or create a narrative that Sanders is somehow on the ebb. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. Sanders' star burns just as bright as it did a week ago or a month ago, and he is still Sanders, regardless of the stories that come out trying to deem that. CNN's poll is somewhat dodgy. That's my point. You can look at the methodology, look at the cross tables, you can all that stuff. And CNN didn't even want to link to that poll, to the methodology of the poll. You had to actually go searching for it in order to find it. All right, I think that's it. There we are. 25%, less than a quarter of the respondents were under 50 in the poll. Understand what I'm saying? The next demographic is going to be millennials. And yet, in the poll, only a quarter of them were represented in the poll. If you want to talk about a dodgy poll, CNN, dodgy poll, purveyor. And I'll end it here because I don't want this one to be too long, and 10 minutes is already too long. All right, guys, I'm going to end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. If CNN is doing this, they're doing this for reasons. And you have to ask the reason why is CNN creating a narrative. Once again, that's not true. Bernie Sanders can't get black people. And then you look at the polling that CNN itself does, and it says, oh, his support among blacks is twice as much as Kamala Harris, who's the next closest black person in the race. She's black, I'm joking. And then this poll, where millennials only make up 25% of the poll, despite millennials going to be the highest sample size in the upcoming election, and that sample size just so happened to be acutely in love with Bernie Sanders. Good job, CNN, being dodgy. shady Beto, and dodgy CNN. Thanks all.